Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Zence Retail CX Learning webinar. Glad to see a lot of you turn up for the webinar today. It's a very important one just right after the election. I think one of the first laws that will get passed is the DPDP Act. So today, of course, we are going to be discussing about this important law what is going to change. Pretty much everything is going to change the way we are collecting data, the customer data sets, and how do we safeguard ourselves from the DPDP Act. The act, of course, is called the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, also known as DPDPA. Firstly, let me introduce you to Yamini Tomar. She heads legal for us and has been very closely monitoring the DPDPA from the day it has been incepted to see what the act is all about, how is it interpreted, and what it means for all of us. We will have her go through the same for the first half of the webinar. Then we have Anjali Thakral. She leads Zence marketing for us. And obviously, looking at the law and the way the act is coming up, we've created a product which can help, which can be implemented for all of the brands. And this can enable us to make sure that we are following the act and we are in line with the policies defined in the act. The last 15 minutes, we will go over Q&A. Of course, the best question will win a prize. And we're going to have a small poll and a small quiz probably. And the winner will be winning something cool. So, Yamini, if you're ready, let's start with the first agenda on what the act is about and how is it going to work for all the brands today.
Hi, Tejas.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tejas, for the introduction. I'll just quickly jump on to the, to the act and explaining everyone involved or present here what the act is all about, what is important. Everything is important, but we'll focus on the most important sections. Just give me one minute. Let me know when you can see the screen.
Not yet. Yeah, there you go.
Can we see it now?
Yes, I think you'll have to just go to the slideshow.
Yeah.
Go full screen.
Sorry, I was just going through the sections, but anyway, is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. So we are talking about the Digital Personal Data Protection Act that came in 2023. When I say it came in 2023, that meant it was passed in the Parliament on 11th of August 23. However, the date of enforcement of the Act is still not to be notified by the central government. So we basically know what is to come when the Act is enforced. However, the detailed rules of the Act are yet to come, and it's probably going to happen within this year. So we can, the point of the seminar is actually to explain the Act and, how we can get started, so that, we have some process in place when, as and when it gets enforced. Now, the agenda, obviously, I'll just tell you the broad agenda, and when I'll jump onto my section. One is we'll focus on the key highlights of the Act. Second section, we'll focus on the next steps for the data fiduciary. Data fiduciary is basically the data controller, which in our case means the brands that we work with. The third section, we'll focus on the actionable that the brands can take in line with Easy Rewards and internally so that their processes are implemented. And fourth section will be taken out by Anjali, which is Zence compliance with the DPDP. Now, section 1 goes to key highlights of the Act. Okay, so the Act basically talks about the applicability, where what the jurisdiction of the Act is, with certain exceptions. The applicability goes on to any data collected in digital form or collected in non-digital form but has been digitalized subsequently within India. So the jurisdiction is India, and if there is any activity related to any goods or services being offered to data principal in India is happening outside India. So the act basically, it means in India and outside India, if the data principal is of India, this is basically in line with GDPR compliances. The act obviously doesn't define any categories to the data, whether it's a sensitive data or a critical data. It talks about digital data that belongs to an individual. And the fines and penalties of this act can go up to INR 250 crores, which is why obviously this act is extremely important. And the non-compliance is not civil but criminal in nature. Then we are going to talk about exceptions of the act doesn't include or is not applicable on any personal data processed by an individual for any personal use. If an individual is processing it for their personal use, then the act is not applicable. If the personal data is made publicly available by an individual, then it's not applicable. And if the person is under an obligation by the law to make the personal data available, then the applicability of the act is not there. Moving on to the next section, we are talking about the key terms of this act. First term, and this is the most important word you'll read in the entire act, is consent. The law says the consent from the data principal, which is the end customer, has to be free, specific, informed, unconditional, unambiguous. So it has to be very specific, explicit consent with the reasoning on why the data is being processed, and obviously a disclaimer that the consent for which the data processor is taking the consent, only then the data will be used, and the processor or the data fiduciary will not use the consent or the data of the data principal for any other purpose. Moving on to data. What means data? I already informed you. Data means any data that is collected digitally or non-digitally but has been digitized subsequently. And it means the representation of any facts, concepts, instructions, which interpretations or processing by human or by automated means. So anything, just to explain it a little bit further and in a simpler term, anything digital that is collected to process and to further provide these services to the clients, that will include data and which makes a person identifiable. Now, moving on to the data fiduciary. Data fiduciary means clients. So easy towards its clients are data fiduciaries. Data fiduciaries are also called as data controllers. Any individual or corporate who's collecting the data from the customers is a data fiduciary. I want to highlight on the fact that data fiduciary plays the most obligatory role in the act. And a lot of compliances, practically 99% of the compliances are on the data fiduciaries. Talking about the data principal means end customers or any individual whom personal data relates, or where the individual is a child, it has to include the parents or a legal guardian. Moving on to the data processor. Data processor means any third-party processor that processes the personal data on behalf of the data fiduciary. In this case, easy towards is the data processor. Personal data, again, like I explained earlier, personal data means any data that makes an individual identifiable. Now, processing. This is another important key term in the act apart from consent. Processing. What processing means? It means any operation performed on digital personal data and includes collection, recording, organizing, structuring, storing, adaptation, alteration, use, alignment, combination, indexing, and disclosure of transmission, and otherwise making restrictions and erasure or destruction. So it means anything, any A to Z thing that you're doing with the data of a data principal, that will mean processing of the data. Okay. Now moving on to the next section, we have included this slide to make inform the data fiduciaries, which are clients, on the key components, on what they need to focus on. Ensure that the process of withdrawal of consent is there. So one is that you have to create a mechanism to ensure that the consent is being taken from the individuals. You also have to create a mechanism on the process of withdrawal of consent. An individual in the act has the right to withdraw their consent, and you will have to stop processing the data as soon as the consent is withdrawn. Which is the next point. Upon withdrawal, ensuring that such information is okay. So when a data fiduciary has a data processor, so for example, in this case, our clients, Easy Rewards is the data processor. So as soon as the client receives the information from the end customer that I am withdrawing my consent, the client should inform Easy Rewards as a data processor that this particular client has withdrawn their consent and we have to stop processing their data. So information to the data processors is extremely important because the data processor only acts at the instructions of the clients. Helping the data principal to make informed decision about the processing. This forms part of the consent. When you take the consent, you have to tell the individuals why you're taking that consent. Consent mechanism is to be set with the processors. Data fiduciary, which is a client, has to make sure that with the data processor, they come up with a mechanism to ensure that the information is being floated when the consent is given, when the consent is withdrawn. Creating data privacy notices that categorically indicate the data principal if they wish to restrict the usage. So if an individual communicates to the brand that I want the use of my personal data to be restricted to this particular purpose only, then that has to be informed within the data fiduciary and to the data processor. Ensuring the role of consent manager. Every data fiduciary has to ensure that within their organization, there is an individual assigned as a consent manager. This consent manager will facilitate collection of consent, withdrawal of consent, and any edits that an individual wants in their data. Moving on to this section, which is on the left side, we talk about consent. I've already explained what consent means. The Act also talks about how the consent has to be taken. It has to be either in English or in any language that is mentioned in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. It cannot be n number of languages. It has to be these particular languages only. Withdrawal of consent. Withdrawal of consent, data principal have the right to withdraw at any time. And upon withdrawal, the fiduciary has to cease the usage of the data immediately upon that, because the law, not just DPDP Act, but also the Information Technology Act says that you have to immediately stop using the data. One, when the individual withdraws their consent, or when the purpose for which you have collected the data is complete, earlier of any of these two. Then it talks about the erasure of data. The data principal, which is an end customer, has the right to correction, completion, updation, and erasure of their personal data. I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, now this is with respect to how the data lifecycle flows through the brand and what is the role of the brand and the data processor, in this case, Easy Rewards. The first step is data collection. Data collection, you have to issue a proper notice, which obviously comes up with the consent form from the data principles on why you are collecting the data and what are you going to use the data for. Then we talk about consent in case there is a minor. The consent form or the privacy notice in which you are including the consent has to also include the section that if a brand is collecting the data from a minor, the minor has received the consent of the guardian, and that section has to be called out. Now, what the data processor has to do in this case, when you're collecting the data, receiving the data from data fiduciary for specified purpose only. Now, as a backend data processor, the data fiduciary has to ensure that they are giving the data to the third-party data processor only for the purpose for which they have received the consent. Now, data processor. Data processing happens. Reason for the processing, you have to mention the reason of the processing. Using collective data for legitimate purpose only. When I say legitimate, obviously it has to be legal purposes only, but it also means that you will not use the data for anything other than what you have mentioned in the consent form. Engagement of third-party data processor and notification of any data breach. If there is a data breach, then you have to inform the government that is circulated under the Act that the data breach has happened, you may not need to inform the data principal that their data has been breached, but you will have to inform the government. Just to make a point here, the DPDP Act have created a board called Data Protection Board of India, which is the authority body of this act. And in case there is a breach happens, this body has to be notified. Now, what the data processor will do for data processing lifecycle, act upon data fiduciary's directions only. The law says that the data processor will only process the data at the instructions of the client. It will not do anything internally to process the data at its own will. It will only act at the instructions of the client. Now, the next thing is storage and transfer. Now, this is obviously I'm going to jot it down into simple terms. The storage has to happen in such a form that there is no breach, there is no leakage. Data retention has to only happen till the time you're processing the data or upon withdrawal. Earlier of any of these things, you can't retain the data for n number of n years or so at your will. You have to delete the data once the processing purpose is complete or the customer withdraws their consent. Data processor has to ensure the same steps. If the data is withdrawn by the individual, data processor will also delete it, and the data processor will also store the data in such a form that there is no breach of data. Now, when I talk about transparency and accountability, which is the last step in the data lifecycle, it basically talks about how we can comply with the act, how we can comply with the law, how we can ensure that all our certification security standards are in place so that we safeguard the individual data. Moving on to section 2, which is next steps for the data fiduciary. Now, this is important for the brands, how they can get an assessment done for their internal, head start on this. Accessing the internal data privacy processing. Data fiduciary, in this case, clients has to ensure that their processes are set. The personnels of, data fiduciary are aware on, how they have to safeguard the data. The data has to be safeguarded, for example, in such a manner that, okay, there is an XYZ individual who has given the data. Only the specific individual who need to know the data should know the data and not the entire organization. Then obviously setting up a data privacy team, which talks about consent manager and data protection officer. Every organization should have these two roles. Consent manager will facilitate data and principals, which means end customers, in consent, giving consent, withdrawing consent, updation, any edits they want to make, etc. And data principal officer is the head of the consent manager who will ensure that there is no breach happening and everything is happening within the required compliance of the law. Second thing that the brands can do is preparing a checklist of app or in-store that collects the data. So a brand collects the data at various points, which is app and in-store, online and offline. And offline data gets digitized. So every brand should prepare a checklist on where data is being collected and how they can come up with the consent forms, how they can take the consents. And third thing is at the data processor's end, which is in this case, Easy Rewards, to make things simpler. Easy Rewards has to ensure every organization that they get the data from, everything is contractual. There are proper, clauses and laws called out in the contracts that talk about data protection. Moving on to section 3, which is brand and Easy Rewards actionable. Now, this stages I would want us to have, discussion based, slide on this. We can make it the actionable in a way that the brands, this is something that the brands can do as a head start. Okay, one is issuance of consent, though there are various ways in which the brands can get a head start on how they can issue the consent. These are the suggestions from Easy Rewards. One is OTP, sent on registration. Then we have welcome messages, which includes that we are taking your consent for so and so purpose, and you have the right to withdraw your consent. Then we have SMSs, which can be sent, SMS, and obviously there are various communication ways in which the brand can reach out to the customers into taking their consent and withdrawing their consent, giving them an option that, okay, this is why we are taking your consent and this is what you can do. That's the first thing that Easy Reward suggests the brands to do. Tejas, any input you have on this that you want to inform everyone?
I think let's complete it, because we also have Anjali on how this has been implemented, and then
Absolutely.
we will open the forum for Q&As where we can
Sure.
discuss some of these.
Understood. Okay. Then we have issue of erasure. Now, the unsubscribe option is available through web page. There has to be an option in which the customer can reach out to the brands either on their website or app that talks about they want to delete their data. They should be given an option to delete their data, which also means erasure. Then we have availability of other rights. To demonstrate compliance, brands should publish the data bill on their websites. This is something that we are suggesting as a good corporate governance step. This is obviously at brands' will, but we suggest that you inform the customer that you are in compliance with the applicable laws that have come in, because a lot of customers might not know about this. Then the third section talks about suggestive actions for the brands and the data processed through Easy Rewards. What we can do immediately, I'm sure a lot of people would be aware of the communications that we get from various government bodies, including Reserve Bank of India or Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, that send communications about various amendments in the law or various rules that come in. Brands can get started on those type of communications in which they can send these to the brands, to the end customers, that okay, this is something that have come in and you have the right to give your consent or withdraw your consent. Every communication obviously have limited words, so it has to be very well drafted in a way that you, again, to focus on the word explicit consent is taken from the end customers. Every brand should focus on updating their privacy policies, website terms of usage. These are the sections that contain the corporate laws and compliances that are applicable. So every brand should include these sections which talk about consent, withdrawal, and updation. Then again, the last thing which I mentioned was informing the customers about the Digital Personal Data Protection Act as a good corporate governance step. Now, liability provisioning section. So this act has a lot of liabilities. The highest liability goes to INR 350 crores. So the brands, we want to suggest the brands to be very cognizant of the fact that on the data fiduciary, which is the brand, the penalty can go up to 250 crore rupees. Data hosting, ensuring the security compliance wherever the data is being hosted, the security compliance, the certifications, including ISO certifications, everything is in line so that the data is protected. And contracts. Contracts is the last thing. We suggest the brands to make sure that their contracts, either the agreements or the addendums, everything has this clause which to talk about Digital Personal Data Protection Act and the compliance with the act. Now we have come up with 3 pointers that the brand can get started on internally, which I just mentioned: privacy policy updation, designing mechanisms to ensure that the consent is being taken, data principals' rights are being called out, and in case a data breach happens, how will the brand inform the Digital Personal Data Protection Board, data processes, how that will happen. A mechanism should be created internally within the client's bodies, so that there is no fuss if and when something like this happens. And making sure that the data retention is only happening till the time data principal have given the consent to, and the purpose of processing is complete and not longer than that. Okay, so just to sum up all this that I mentioned and highlighting the key takeaways: cross-border applicability data. This act also applies to anything happening outside India if it is happening to the data or services or goods given in India. Consent, making sure that the explicit consent is attained. Data retention and erasure. Data has to be retained only for the particular point till the customer withdraws or till the processing is done, and not more than that, and immediately erased. Now, one point in this is RBI, any law that requires you to retain the data, you have to call it out. If you are collecting any KYC information of the client, you have to call it out that we will be retaining the data for so and so period as per RBI guidelines, and not more than that. And consent manager appointing is very vital, because the consent manager has to also be registered with the Digital Data Protection Board of India, which governs the act, and to ensure that everything runs smoothly within the organization. That concludes my session. Thank you so much. And we'll take the questions in 15 minutes.
So I know, Yamini, thank you. I think it was very informative, a little bit scary in the way it has been structured. So guys, don't get scared. We've got Anjali who's created a solution for you, which will help us, create a process where we can comply to the policies. And we've built out a product which can enable you to be in line with what needs to get done from a processor side. Obviously, there are some things which need to be done at the brand level, things like a consent manager, updating the policies on the website. So those things will come in. Be rest assured that once the law is passed, we will do the communication to you on what content needs to come up at all various places wherever you are collecting data. But things like what you do in stores, where you have a feedback page, or you write this book where you collect data, that is something which should stop as soon as possible, because that data technically, if it is, though it is converted into a digital form, becomes a threat from a law perspective. So the better way to do is implement a feedback platform where you can put a QR code and collect that data. But implementing the data where it is collected on physical books is something which we should get away as soon as possible, because the time once the law is going to get passed is not going to be that long for it to get implemented. And I think they're just creating the structure, waiting for this elections to get over. So that process will become quicker once the elections are over. So we've got Anjali. She's been obviously working very closely with Yamini to see that what can be created from a product side so that the brands have to have a little amount of things to be done at their end, and what the way the erasure of data can be done and the way the consent can be taken is something which she's mapped out. So she's also created customer journeys of what happens pre-DPDR, DPDP Act, and what we believe should be the current, what should be the right force of DPDP, once the DPDP Act is implemented, what is the journey of the customer consent and deletion to be done is what she's brought out. And she will also show you some of the screens which will get activated once the DPDP laws are in place. So we've already defined on how the customer consent will be taken, how deletion of data can be done from the platform. So we've actually created a platform for enabling the structures of the acceptance of consent and also deletion of data from the data principle itself. Anjali, all yours.
Thank you, Tejas. Good evening, everyone. So I hope everyone is now aware of why DPDP is so important to be implemented, and many of you must be looking out for the solution. So let us talk about the solution in the form of Zence CRM. I'll just share my screen. So yeah, Zence Unified CRM is the solution that we have been looking forward to be compliant with the entire DPDP Act. We have divided this solution into two parts. So one is collecting the consent, and the second part would be enabling the users to execute their privileges of knowing about the data and raising the erasure requests and other things which Yamini just talked about a few minutes back. So we'll start with the journey. Yeah, we'll start with the journey which is there at present, which is the pre-DPDP flow of how the customer enrollment happens. So customer enrollment usually happens from various touch points, which can be offline POS systems, which can be online systems like your website, mobile application and all, from where the customer goes, fills up the form and simply submits the detail to get enrolled and then continues with the journey. This journey may be OTP driven, where the email or mobile number is given and OTP gets validated, and it can be a OTP-less journey as well. So post DPDP, how this journey will change is that we need to identify the customer, and in the same process flow, we need to collect the consent also to ensure that we have the needful information captured before storing the customer data. So again, the customer interacts with the same touch points, and in the same journey only, we are introducing this solution to collect the consent. So there can be two set of users. One is the new users who will keep coming and getting enrolled to the program, and there could be a set of users who already exist as a part of the program from whom the consent has not been collected, because till now there is no such thing called consent which is being collected and stored. So inside the journey only, when the customer comes first at the touch point, it will be identified whether it is an existing customer or a new customer. So the journey for a new customer and existing customer without the consent would remain the same. I mean, will be the same. So in this case, at the touch point, it would be identified whether the customer exists or not. And if the consent does not exist, there can be two types of flows which can be defined in order to collect the consent. One would be the OTP-less flow and one would be the OTP-driven flow. If the brand wants to have a OTP-driven flow, in this case, after identifying the customer, one this OTP generation button would be provided. So at the POS, a screen will have to be presented, which would ask the customers to provide to click on the button and get the OTP generated. Once the OTP gets generated and sent to the mobile number of the customer, they input the OTP, click on submit, OTP gets validated and the journey continues. And in this entire journey, we capture the consent and save it in the database. In case the brand opts for the OTP-less journey, in this case, before submitting the actual profile details of the customer, the brand will have to very broadly highlight why the customer is submitting, and while the customer is submitting the profile details, they are also providing their consent to be part of the program and using their data for different things like sending the communications and their doing the data analytics on the data and all.
So here,
just
to add to what Anjali is saying, the way that mention will happen, there will be a checkbox which you'll have to put on the POS. Obviously, your website is pretty easy to do, but on the POS, you will have a checkbox which says that I agree to the terms and conditions of the data, and that will then get communicated to the customer. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just to ensure that there is not a major change in the customer experience, but yes, in the backend, APIs will have to be updated, the implementation part. So we'll be capturing consent by using two specific APIs which we have designed, which are very easily integrated, which can very easily be integrated at any touch point. And they will also ensure that the consent for the existing customer gets collected besides the new customer consent. Second part of the solution is enabling the users to view their data and perform various activities on the data. So as Yamini has just few minutes back informed that all the customers have the right to obtain information about how their data is being processed by the brand. They can seek the correction, or they can seek at any point of time the erasure of their personal data from the brand's database, which means they are opting out of the program. They have so again, as a mandate, they can nominate a person to whom the benefits would be transferred in case of the death of the account holder. This is specifically for that purpose. and a grievance redressal forum. So in order to provide all these privileges to the customers, we have come up with a solution which can very easily be integrated with the touch points, be it a website or a mobile application. When the customer logs into the application, they can be shown a tab which would say my data privileges or my privileges, manage my data. Customer clicks on the tab and this screen will open up where we have 4 different options to execute each of this required mandatory information. So first is obtaining information about how the data processing is being done. In this case, there are two things which we would be displaying to the customer. We'll display all the communication details which have been sent to the customer, because this is one of the things for which we have been using this data, along with the status of whether the communication was sent successfully or it got failed, and it will be highlighted in different colors. It will have date and time and the type of communication which will be sent, which was sent, I mean. And then the second screen displays, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, the second screen displays the benefits.
Anjali, you will have
It
to
is
open
something
up the
has
Marvel.
happened.
Anjali, you'll have to open the Marvel link. This is on the deck.
Yeah, my bad. Yeah, I'll walk you through the Marvel also. My bad. I'm so sorry. So second screen will display the benefits of the programs which have been issued to the customer in form of points, coupons, and gift vouchers. And also we provide the option to download this data. So this data can be downloaded in the form of an Excel, which would list all the information which is being displayed here. Second is seeking erasure of personal data or updates in the data. So any customer can at any point of time can log in and can raise the account deletion request, and the customer will be, any information related to the customer will be removed from the program database. And we would provide 2 different flows to the brand here. One would be the instant deletion of data and one is the moderated deletion of data. When I walk you through the Marvel, I'll explain you in details how instant and moderated deletion will work. Next option is the nomination. So this is applicable only in case of the death of the account holder, wherein the account holder can nominate a person to whom all the benefits would be transferred in case of unavailability of the actual account holder. So in this case, benefits in the form of rewards which are accumulated in the account of the account holder, like points, credit notes, GVs, coupons, can only be transferred to the nominee, and the transactions and all will remain in the actual account only, which can be deactivated after the nomination has been claimed. And a person can nominate only one user, and a nominee can have multiple nominations in their name, because I can, for example, nominate my brother to whom my mother has also nominated, and so on. So a nominee can have multiple nominations, but one user would be allowed to give only one nomination. Then it is about the grievance redressal of the data which is being consumed by the brand. If user has any queries, any complaints related to the data usage, they can raise through this forum. And this forum again acts in 2 ways. If so, we have a tool. Zence CRM has a tool called ticketing, which is a tool to log your complaints and leads. So in case that tool is enabled for the brands, a ticket would be created in the tool, and the journey will be continued in the ticket. It will be allocated to the respective customer care managers, and they can continue with the journey. And in case the tool is not enabled for the brand, an email would be generated and sent to a predefined email ID of the brand. So from there, they can pick up the query and continue with the journey. I'll now walk you through another solution. This is basically, this provides customers a platform to manage the kind of subscriptions they have with the brand. So the customers will be having option to select the channel by which they want to receive the communication. It can be SMS, it can be email, it can be WhatsApp, it can be notifications. So all the enabled channels for the brand would be listed here, and customer can also select the frequency of how many times they would want to receive the communication from a brand on that particular channel. So for example, if I select 3 against SMS, I in weekly. So which means in a week, not more than 3 communications via SMS can be sent to my mobile number. So this provides an added advantage and gives another tool to help customers retain their rights. I'll quickly summarize the gist of takeaways,
I
and
think,
I'll then.
Yamini,
Yeah.
sorry, Anjali, before you do the key takeaways, I think if you can just show the marvel and then do the key takeaways.
Okay, I'll just give a quick walkthrough of the Marvel. Give me 1 second. Huh? Yeah. So this is the screen of the tool that can be embedded with any web application, any mobile application. It will be embedded via a single sign-on mechanism, so user will not have to log in again to access this.
So
And
just
users.
adding one more thing here, you can do this via WhatsApp also, where on WhatsApp we can have an option saying that I want to update my privileges for communication, and that will bring them to this platform, which is the Zence DPDP platform itself, where they can log on and come back to the same interface.
Right. So this is the kind of data that we would be displaying to the customers. And if they click on this download button icon, this entire communication history would be downloaded. And this history can be seen depending upon the duration. We can change the duration from this drop down of calendar. If I click on benefits, it will display the summary of all benefits that have been rewarded to the customer, their coupons, along with the details of what was the coupon all about, what was the bill on which this coupon got issued, what was the date, expiry, and the current status of the coupon. Similarly, for the points in GVs also, we would be displaying the similar information. And again, this can be filtered basis the date. Moving on to the account deletion and erasure request. So as I explained that there are 2 flows which we would be providing. One is the instant deletion and one is the moderated deletion. Instant deletion is driven through OTP. So this screen will not be shown to the customers. This is just for the understanding that, this, if we select the option for moderated deletion, in this case, a link would be sent to the customer's email ID, and an intimation would be sent to the brand that this customer has requested for deletion. A dashboard would be provided to the brand, and the brand can then connect with the customer, try to understand their problem and try to retain the customers, because deletion of account means losing a customer, right? So that is why this moderated process plays a role. So once the erasure confirmation is given by the customer by clicking on the link, then the profile will get deleted. And in case there is a OTP driven flow, OTP would be sent to the customer's mobile number. They input the OTP. As soon as they input the OTP and click on confirm, the account would be deleted. So which means the customers will not have any access to their information in the brand, and all their coupons, points, and other rewards get nullified. They'll not be able to use those rewards again. Moving on to the third part of the privileges, which is nomination. So this is how a user can nominate someone to claim their benefits. So the user would be adding the nominee name, mobile number, and email ID along with the date of birth. This information is mandatory to be added, because this is how at the time of claim verification would be done that the correct person is asking for the claim. Once the user clicks on nominate, an email would be sent to the nominee's ID. A message would be sent to the nominee, which would contain one claim code. So whenever the nominee is trying to claim any nomination, they'll have to click on this not claimed button. You can change the label also here. Enter the claim code which was sent to them at the time of nomination in the message or in the email or on WhatsApp, whatever medium we choose to send this information. Enter the details, click on submit, and they'll be able to claim the benefits. Okay, yeah, in between, we can also enable the OTP driven flow to ensure that the correct person and the correct mobile number is claiming it. They click on claim and all the benefits would be transferred to the new account which gets created for the nominee. And the transactions still remain tagged to the old user account, which can be deactivated, would not be accessible. If we come to the grievances can be added from here. A person can select the type of issue they are facing and then can detail about it. They can also add an email ID on which they want the copy of this grievance to be shared for the later tracking. And clicking on submit will raise the complaint. See, I click on the create and successfully created, which means the grievance has been created. In case ticketing is enabled, a ticket will get logged into the brand's account and would be allocated to the respective customer success person. And in case ticketing is not enabled, an email will get generated and sent to the respective email ID, predefined email ID provided by the brand. So this is all about the privilege management tool. The next tool which I talked about was where the customers can select their subscription to various channels of communication, where the brand would be sending different kind of communication. So these are the channels. Then the communication can be segregated as promotional and transactional communication, and accordingly, the user can come, click on edit, and select their preferences. They want to set up the preferences for transactional communication. They want to get 3 weekly communication on, the specified channel, or 5 weekly communications, or it can be 4 in a month. So whatever they select and update here, not more than that selected communication can be sent to the customer on the respective channel. And this information can be flown back to the brand, which can be utilized later by brands to, accordingly send the communication to their customers through other mediums as well, because this platform will control only the communication which is sent through Easy Rewards modes. So this is all about the Marvel. I will go back to the presentation and the key takeaways, and then we can move on to the Q&A session. So the takeaways are that we offer you 2 easy to integrate APIs, which will help you make compliant with the law. It is not only about collecting consent for the new users, but also for the existing customers, which will make us future ready when the law gets announced and enforced. And the customers get a good control over the information and execute their rights to know about how their information is getting processed by us. Thank you, everyone. So now we can proceed for
Thank
the
you,
Q&A.
Anjali. Very informative, and I think it has been done well. We're going to open the floor to questions. I already see 3, 4. There's one question from Vivek. It says we are using the LPAS product. Please let us know that is there any difference between Zence and LPAS? I hope data protection law will apply. Yes, LPAS. So we will obviously be setting up a session on how the LPAS has evolved to Zence, but it will be applicable on all the current products. In fact, for Zence and Popin both. The second question from Prashant, for how long a data consent is valid for a brand? Yamini, is there a clause on it yet, or nothing is defined yet on it?
No, so the consent is valid for the till. So okay, there are 2 sections in this. One is when you have taken a consent for a particular purpose, the consent is only valid for till that particular purpose is complete. If you want to process the data for any other thing, then you have to take the consent again, because the consent definition says it has to be very explicit and the reason for processing has to be mentioned. Other than this, if an individual withdraws their consent, then obviously the purpose completes there, and the consent obviously remains no longer valid, and you have to delete the data. I hope that answers.
Right. That's cool. Nitesh has put a question. Do we need to go back and collect consent from all existing consumers? Two, from the dormant also, since we do dormant campaigns at times, we should. Okay, so Yamini, is there a law? I mean, is it yet confirmed in it that if the customer is dormant, do we also need to have a consent, or we can still do communication without collecting consent from dormant customers?
Yeah,
Is there
I'll
anything
answer both
around?
the questions. One is that do we need to take the consent from the existing customers? Yes, you do. Second is if the customer is dormant, that means the purpose for which you're collecting the data is not clear, which means that you can't really process it. So if you take a consent, you have to take the consent from the dormant customers. If they don't give it, then you can't process their data.
Okay. So then we will have to we'll have to anonymize it as of this point.
Yes. Because the law says that you have to delete the data till the purpose is when the purpose is complete, or you have to the Information Technology Act says the same, that you have to delete the data if you're not using it. If you're using it, then you have to take the consent.
There's a question from Swapnil, which says post reversal of consent from end customer, what specific data is to be erased? Swapnil, I think we showed that in the demo. That pretty much the PII data needs to get deleted, which is the first name, last. I mean, pretty much the demographic data will get deleted, and that will get replaced by an anonymized data field, which means that no personal data relative to transaction will be put onto the system. It will become like a guest user field. There's a question from Swapnil Aghari. It says, is there any guidelines on how the consent can be revoked? Like if the consent was given on the platform, can it be revoked by the user on a voice call with the customer? Yamini?
No, so when you say voice call by the customer, do you have the feature where the customer can reach out to you through voice call?
Right.
You
So
have
if
to allow them with the
you have to
feature,
allow
right?
to have it. So Swapnil, the answer is that if you want to enable via voice call, you will have to create a feature where on the voice call, they will have a specific channel where they can say, I want to delete my data. And then that recording will have to take place, and it'll go to the consent manager. We will accept that, this call had come, and then they will delete the data. That's the process which can take place from it, Swapnil. Chirag has a question. How can brand leverage DPDP as a competitive advantage? And what's the potential risk of neglecting DPDP consideration? Chirag, I think from a DPDP, it is not from a competitive advantage perspective. It is a privacy law where we are saying that a customer has a right to their own data, and they have a right to delete the data. So neglecting the DPDP will attract a fine for up to 250 crore. That fine still has been getting structured, but I don't think that any brand can neglect the law anymore because it's already passed. And once it comes into action, every brand in India, even if they have stores in India plus global, will have to follow the act and have to build the platform in a way that the actions have been taken. So there is no option of them getting out of it. There's a question from Vishal. How nominee data will get updated at the customer database? How would that reconcile? And the second question is, how will we be restricted if the customer has no or not being updated? Anjali, would you want to answer it? How nominee data will get updated at a customer database level? How would that be reconciled? You're on mute, Anjali.
Sorry, yeah. So the nominee data, while a nominee is trying to claim the nomination, we would be ensuring that one thing is the claim code which was sent, and rest of the details which were added at the time of creating that nomination should match. Then only we'll allow the claim of that nominee. And while the nominee can be already a member of the program, in case it is not a member of the program, it will have to enroll them, send them. So we'll be sending one intimation message which would tell them that they have been enrolled for the nomination purpose, and they'll have only access to the provided benefits. And again, they'll be sent a link from where they can go click and provide their consent to be a part of the program, since they would be utilizing the benefits that have been transferred.
And the second part is how will we be restricted if the customer has not been updated for the channel? Will it allow us send it anyways? How we will be restricted if the customer has not been updated for the channel? What is Vishal? I don't know if are you on the call?
I guess this is
Is it
related to
restricted to
that
the channel subscription?
communication. Probably, yeah. So by default, all channels get subscribed to whatever brand is using. All the communication would be sent, and once the customer comes and updates the subscription preferences, then only the filters would get applied.
I think the last question is how can brands strike a balance between utilizing customer data for personalization while respecting the privacy boundaries? See here, I mean, the easiest way to do is that, instead of changing the system too much, you enable the communication on SMS and WhatsApp that, we are going to, that you consent to give TNCs, which means that you are part of the policy of the DPDP Act, and that will enable you to continue what you're doing today. And you are still within the boundaries as long as the communication has gone to the customer, right? And you will have the boundary met because you will also have the feature which you will communicate to the customer that you can enable. I mean, you as a customer have the right to delete the data as long as both the platforms are enabled. You will have a pretty good balance of making sure that you are within the DPDP policies and still be able to do the communication the way you're doing it today. So I don't see that much of a threat as long as both the platforms are enabled. The challenge that comes in things which you are doing physically or you are collecting data outside of the CRM program itself. If that data comes in, that could be a risk which could come in where the database is not structured into the game. And there, if the consent is not there and you're communicating to the customer, could become a problem. So you obviously will need to run a CRM program to make sure the data is collected. And pretty much all touch points where the data is collected, be it website, digital receipt, at POS, WhatsApp, all of these channels, the communication is made clear that we are following DPDP and you have the right to delete data from a consent means, right? So that mandatory needs to be done. We will be sending out some structures in terms of, what needs to, like an action plan at both ends, and what needs to be done at a brand end and what we need to implement at our end. And we will be testing it out for each of the brands. So we rest assured on making sure that we will get that done. Okay, so there are some questions more. Okay, so there's a question from Amit. It says, you said that the act has come in August 2023. So why was the consent not required till now? And consent approval is required only for D&D customer or for anyone? Anubhuti, Yamini, you want to answer the first part, that why is the consent not required till now?
Yeah. So, Amit, the act is not enforced yet. It was passed in the parliament in August 2023. The date of enforcement is yet to be notified by the central government.
So we will have sufficient time, Amit, by the time the enforcement comes in. They have not even defined the people or the committee who's going to be part of the DPDP yet. So there is some time, but we need to start preparing from now so that we meet all the conditions when it is enforced. And consent approval is required only for DND, or is it for everyone? Anjali or Yamini? Is it only for DND customer? It's for everyone.
No, it's required for every customer.
Vrishali has a question. Does brand compulsory need to allow customer to transfer benefits to a nominee? Yamini, is that a mandate that the transfer has to happen?
No, it doesn't talk about transferring benefits to the nominee. It basically talks about that an individual has to appoint a nominee. So because if something happens to an individual, the nominee should have the right of the individual to erase the data or to withdraw their consent.
So the transfer of benefit is not mandatory. I mean,
yes, it's not called out. It is not mandatory and it's not called out.
Durga, there's a question. Sorry?
No, I was just saying it is part of the product and it is configurable, and on the brand's discretion, we can allow in this.
There's a question by Durga. It says we are verifying while redeeming point coupon. Will it be considered as a consent? Yamini, that when the
No,
customer is redeeming the points,
when
you are anyways doing an
yes,
OTP check. So is
yeah,
that not enough as a consent that you are a part of the
no,
program?
no, Tejas. Unfortunately, it's not, because the act says that it has to be very, very explicit consent. You have to call out every purpose for which you are collecting the data. So verification is not consent taking.
Okay, there's another question from Nitesh. Can we tap consumers through regular marketing campaigns using the marketing channel on WhatsApp or SMS without sender ID? This also needs consent. Nitesh, are you saying that you have affiliate data which you would want to communicate? Is that what it means? Nitesh? If I'm getting the question correct, it means that if you are,
Maybe yes.
so this is like affiliated data which you have and you would want to send a communication to this set of customers?
Yeah, maybe if I want to.
So for consent collection, Nitesh, you can send it on the regular channels. That's not an issue. That's not, I mean, that's not put in the law that you can send it on what channel. On regular channels, you can send the consent forms itself. What happens is once the customer says, I want to delete my data, you will not have information of the customer at all. Right? And which means that you will not know who the customer was or what transaction they've done if they subscribe to deletion of data. So you will not be able to communicate to them even without a sender ID, because the data will be deleted off the database completely. It will be wiped off. Right? So if the customer chooses to delete the data, there will be no touch point of the data that exists in the database at all. It will be deleted from all sources from a data processor perspective. So you will not be able to communicate.
I also want to highlight one thing, Tejas, in this particular point, that for affiliate data, you will not be the data controller to actually be able to take the consent or delete the consent, like Tejas mentioned.
Yeah, and I think there's the last three questions. Salesh has a question. How can retail brands ensure compliance with cross-border data transfer under the DPDP Act? Yamini, you want to take it? How do they comply
Yes.
for cross-border data regulation?
Absolutely. So any company has to ensure, even if it is based out of India, but it's processing the data in India, for example, through their branch offices or any way, they have to ensure that all these applicable guidelines about taking the consent, withdrawal of consent, everything is structured in your organization. You need to have the policies in place that talks about all these things. Privacy policies have to be updated. All the mechanisms, including the appointment of consent manager, has to happen even if there is a branch office in India. So that has to happen at an organization level.
So reiterating the question, if you have a store in America,
Yeah.
but the principal brand is in India, so the store in America also will have to follow the DPDP Act?
No, it's the other way around. So, for example, if the corporate office is based out of India, but there is an office in India that's collecting the data principals data and it's processing the data, then that has to be complied with. As long as the data principal who is based in India is not affected, then, for example, in your example, that store is not affected because the data principal is not of India and the data is not being processed in India.
Okay.
If it is being processed in India, then yes.
Prashant has a question. Do we have to refresh the consent periodically, or once collected, it stays forever? Yamini, I think it's a
It
great question,
stays,
Prashant.
yeah, it stays until the customer withdraws it or the purpose is complete for which you have collected it, because you will call out the purpose and the consent when you take it. Once it's completed, you have to delete it. You can't retain it, keep as a dormant data. It can't be like that.
Nitish has a very valid question. They also use the ticketing tool to document concerns from consumers. Like, for example, the customer is on Instagram and they have a complaint, and they use the tool to document that consent, concern. Then do we need the consent there as well? Because you don't, I mean, so you are on what, say Instagram, and only your Instagram ID is available for us to know what problem is there. So they're saying in that case, how will the consent come in? Because you don't even know the customer identity. You only know their user ID. So is there some law on it yet, or it's not yet passed?
No, there is no law, Tejas, but obviously you will have certain disclaimer sort of thing mentioned in that section, which will guide the customer, which the customer should be able to go to your privacy policy and see what all you're doing with their data. So there are always ways in which you can make sure that you are at your end informing the customers.
So Nitish, actually, it's a pretty cool question, which means that if the customer is writing on a Zomato, or in your case, the customer is written on Instagram or Facebook and complaining about it, and the data is collected. So I think you will also have to have that when you answer back to the customer, you will have to have a link which will say that we follow the DPDP policy, and it will have the link to the website where you will put in saying that we have followed the guidelines for making sure that we are answering, right? And that's what Yamini is hinting to. The last question we got from Sailesh, what responsibilities do retail brands have when using third-party data processor under the DPDP Act? Yamini?
Yeah, okay. So data processor, third-party data processor will only be acting upon the instructions of the brands. So if a retail brand gets an information that the customer wants to delete their data, the brand will have to inform Easy Rewards, because we are, in a way, we are a backend service provider and you are the customer facing party. So you will have to make sure that you are letting the data processor, making the data processor informed about everything that is happening at in data principal and data fiduciary level, so that we can also act accordingly.
Oh, sorry. I think there are some 7-8 other questions. There's a question from Biswajit. It says 2 critical questions. How long the consent is valid? Okay, I think we've answered that. Existing customer, how consent to be taken or mandatory. So that also we've answered, Biswajit, where the existing customer, you will have to communicate to them saying that we have this consent which we'll have to give. And Anjali, can they just give like a missed call and the consent is recorded, or something like that can be done for existing customer, or they have to, because the customer might be existing into the program for years. So how does the consent work for existing customer?
So it will mandatorily be collected from the customers, existing customers as well, and we'll have to facilitate different touch points from where they can, provide the consent. Missed call can be one of the mediums, but we'll have to first inform them through campaigns or something that they need to provide their consent. Otherwise, whenever the customer is coming to any touch point for different transactions, at that point of time, we can identify if the consent is not existing, and we throw them that screen to, approve the consent.
Vishal has a question. Channel means SMS, WhatsApp, email. Yeah, so SMS, WhatsApp, email / RCS. So all channels you will have in that process. Santosh has a question. Also, if the customer has had some issues with the brand regarding quality of product or anything, can they misuse the grievance right as a penalty for the brand? Yeah, it's a pretty good, actually, it's a very valid question. So Yamini, the question is, say the customer is not happy with the product, and in the grievance, can they put in that the brand misused my data because the penalty is significantly high, and create a means where the brand will have to pay and technically becomes like a blackmail for them to pay up to the customer by using the grievance rights?
Okay, so the act right now, obviously, I want to highlight that the rules of the act are yet to come in. Every act comes with the rules that basically is a process to be followed. The act right now says that an investigation will obviously take place by the Data Protection Board of India, and no brand will be penalized unless there's an investigation that has happened. And obviously, so for example, if a customer reaches out to the consent manager of a brand saying that I'm not happy and you are using using my data illegally or not with my consent, then obviously the brand will figure it out in there will be means in which they can figure it out how they are processing their data. And if the customer has given their consent, then you right there have the proof that you are using it for an legal use. And that will obviously be there in the investigation that will take place by the Data Protection Board of India. So there is no, right on penalty that, okay, this is what you have done and this is the penalty. There's obviously an investigation that will happen.
The next question is, no invoice can be generated without putting customer mobile number. So if the customer doesn't give the consent, can the bill still be raised putting the mobile number, or we will have to put it with some predefined numbers? Anjali, in the digital bill, if the customer, because I mean, this is to Yamini and Anjali both, obviously that when I want to do a digital bill, I will have to put the mobile number and the bill will get triggered to the customer. So how will the consent be taken when the bill is getting triggered to the customer? Is it going to be a communication on the digital bill that I consent, or how will this take place for the digital bill scenario specifically?
Anjali, I'll just tell what this comes in and you can explain the process. Okay, this comes under the explicit consent part where the customer knows that an actionable can only take place where they give that particular information. So the Act calls this part as an explicit consent or automatic consent in a manner that, okay, if the customer doesn't give a mobile number, the brand cannot really act on it. However, that mobile number can only be used to generate that bill. And over to you, Anjali, you can explain the process of this.
Yeah, so on digital receipt also we can provision the placement of this consent collection mechanism where if the customer identified as not having a consent, they will be shown this tab where they can click, and again the consent collection flow would initiate for them and they'll have to enter the OTP to provide the consent. But as rightly said by Yamini, if it is only for the bill generation and it has already been part of the transaction, that bill would definitely be sent if we get the mobile number.
Okay, and I think I believe this amongst the last. Will Yogesh has the question? Will this data be provided to email SMS providers also? Will the providers suppress the data automatically if the brand will have to do it manually? This is for Anjali. If the customer consents that I want to delete the data, will we be providing? I mean, I think Yogesh has the question. Will this go to the SMS provider saying that don't communicate to the customer? Is that anything that, I mean, I think it does not. Yogesh, just to answer it, it's not relevant in our scenario because once it is deleted from our system, the SMS and email providers don't know who the customer is at all because that encryption is already built in. So this is not relevant in the scenario where the provider will know who the customer is. So if we delete the data from our system, linking it to the transaction, that data any which ways will not go out to the customer at all from a communication standpoint, right? So that becomes a little bit, I mean, it does not need to go at all unless you're running campaigns manually on the SMS provider's screen. And then you will have to make sure that they are also aware that these customers have deleted the data and they need to be excluded from then they have to be removed from their databases. So technically, if you are putting your data in multiple data sources, then if the customer has given a consent that I want to erase my data, you will have to manually go and delete your data at all sources where you've collected the data points. Right, and that will enable to make sure that the data of that customer does not come back on any of the other touch points where the data is being put in. How does the DPDP change as per organization responsibility to data breach? Will an individual know who breaches which brand the data? Anjali, how does the DPDP change an organization's response to personal data breaches? Will an individual know who breaches which brand or place the data is there?
Sorry, Tejas, I'm not able to understand the question properly. Like what breaches?
Yogesh, if you're on call, can you rephrase the question? Okay, and I think the last question from an online perspective, where does cookies come under DPDP Act? Yamini, the website cookies, which is putting data points of the customer, is there any view on the online cookies for the DPDP Act at all? Yamini, you are frozen. Sailesh, it's a good question. I don't think there is an explicit information on the cookie part of it. But if you look at the Google information which is coming, they are going to be stopping putting the first party data on the cookie at all. So the tracking will not happen. And anonymous tracking where the customer is not identified directly with their PII data, but with a cookie identifier, I don't think that falls into the policy because there is no direct information of the customer. But Yamini, are you on call? Yamini is on mute. Okay, that brings us to the end of the webinar. It has been a great session for all of us. And if there are any questions, please reach out. We're going to be putting out this deck, which we have just sent, and you can reply back. And we are more than happy to take these questions offline. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for the session, and we will be doing multiple other sessions across various topics. So be tuned, and we would love to see the same amount of enthusiasm and the same amount of participation in all the other webinars we do throughout the year. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Anjali, and thank you, Yamini, for your great insights.